I remember that night like a punch to the gut. The clock had just hit 2 in the morning when I heard the garage door creak open. My husband, Greg, stumbled into the house, smelling like cheap whiskey and a perfume I didn't own. He tossed his jacket on the chair and acted like nothing was wrong. I asked, "Where have you been?" He gave me that cocky half smile and said, "I got the attention I needed." Imagine hearing that from the man you've been married to for 15 years. No shame, no apology, just smug satisfaction. I froze. Every instinct screamed at me to blow up, but instead I stayed quiet. Sometimes silence says more than 1,000 screaming matches. He thought he'd won that round, walking past me like I was invisible. I sat there on the couch, the smell of alcohol and perfume lingering in the air, and thought about how far we'd fallen. Greg wasn't always like this. He used to come home at a normal hour, ask about my day, hug our kids before bed. Now he was out half the night, snapping at me when I asked questions, and feeding me excuses that didn't even line up. It wasn't subtle, and it wasn't clever. It was sloppy. Part of me wanted to laugh. Who cheats and then walks in at 2 a.m. like they're the hero of the story? He didn't even bother to shower off the evidence. It was insulting. I wasn't just hurt. I was furious at how little respect he had left for me, for us. If he was going to betray me, at least put in some effort to cover his tracks. But Greg underestimated me, like he always did. I didn't say another word that night. He crashed on the bed, reeking of cologne that wasn't his, and I lay there wide awake. My mind was spinning with questions. Who was she? How long had this been going on? Did he think I was stupid enough not to notice? And more importantly, what was I going to do about it? The next morning, he strutted into the kitchen, kissed me on the cheek like nothing had happened, and poured himself a coffee. My daughter Emily, 16 and sharp as a whip, sat at the table rolling her eyes. Nathan, my 13-year-old, barely looked up from his cereal. Kids aren't dumb. They can smell tension the same way I smelled that perfume. Greg acted like we were still some picture-perfect family, and that's when it hit me. He thought he could get away with this forever. He thought I'd play the clueless wife who keeps the house running while he runs around town, getting attention. That line burned in my head all day. I got the attention I needed. From who, Greg? And why wasn't your family enough? I knew I had two choices: blow up and give him the fight he wanted, or stay calm and start paying attention myself. I chose the second. Greg had no idea that his little midnight confession had lit a fire under me. He thought my silence meant weakness. It wasn't weakness, it was strategy. That night, when he went out again, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, pulling up our bank statements. That's when the first odd charges showed up. Expensive dinners, hotel stays in Cincinnati he never told me about. My hands shook as I clicked through, but there was also this strange sense of relief. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining it. The proof was there in black and white. I didn't let on that I knew. He walked back in at midnight, mumbling something about late meetings. I smiled, nodded, and made a mental note of the time. Every lie he told was going into my mental filing cabinet. I was building a case, and he didn't even know he was handing me the evidence. Looking back, I realized that night at 2 a.m. was the turning point. Before that, I still had doubts. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe stress was making me paranoid. But once he opened his mouth and bragged about getting attention, he gave me all the confirmation I needed. He wasn't just cheating on me, he was daring me to catch him. And if he thought I was going to roll over and let him win, he had no idea who he married. If you've ever been through something like this, I'd love to hear how you handled it. Drop a comment and share your story. It helps more than you think when people realize they're not alone in dealing with cheating stories and revenge stories. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you want more real family drama like this. That night, lying in bed next to a man I no longer recognized, I decided something important. Greg had crossed a line he couldn't come back from. I wasn't going to scream, and I wasn't going to cry in front of him. I was going to be smart, patient, and 10 steps ahead. If he wanted to play games, I was about to show him I could play too, and play to win. The first thing I did after that night was start watching him with fresh eyes. I wasn't looking for proof anymore, I already had it. I was looking for the details, the patterns, the little cracks that told me this wasn't a one-time mistake, but a lifestyle he'd gotten comfortable with. Greg had always been predictable. Up at 6, coffee with too much sugar, out the door by 7:30, back home before dinner. He'd been the kind of man who used to text if he was running late. Now, suddenly, his schedule looked like Swiss cheese. Whole evenings vanished with no explanation. He'd come home at odd hours, still dressed in work clothes, but without the stress of someone who'd been in back-to-back meetings. He'd go straight to the shower the second he walked in, which was laughable. This was the same guy who once fell asleep on the couch in his work boots because he was too lazy to take them off. Now he was suddenly obsessed with freshening up. The steam in the bathroom gave him cover to avoid my questions. He'd emerge smelling like soap I never bought and cologne I never liked, and somehow that was supposed to reassure me. One night, I noticed his phone never left his hand. Greg used to toss it on the counter and forget about it. Now he carried it like it was an extension of his body. He started taking calls outside, in the garage, in the backyard. When I asked who it was, the answer was always, work. Sure. At 10 o'clock at night. With a smile he tried to hide. Even the kids picked up on it. Emily rolled her eyes more than usual. She'd mutter things like, "Guess Dad's busy again," when he skipped another dinner. Nathan would ask why Dad couldn't just eat with us like before. Greg didn't even notice how obvious he was being. Or maybe he noticed and just didn't care. Both options stung. Then there was the spending. I handled the bills, so it wasn't hard to catch. Restaurant charges in neighborhoods we never visited. Hotels in Dayton, even though his company's office was downtown. And always on weeknights when he was supposedly stuck at the office. He wasn't even creative about hiding it. That's what blew my mind. He was sloppy, like he didn't think I'd ever bother to check. The part that cut deepest wasn't even the lies. It was the way he treated me in between them. He stopped asking how my day was. He stopped noticing when I cut my hair or bought a new dress. Instead, he'd make little digs. "Why are you so tired all the time? Do you ever think about doing something exciting for once?" He was rewriting the story in his head, painting me as boring so he could justify his little adventures. I learned to play it cool. I nodded, smiled, and tucked every insult away with the receipts and the timestamps. The more he tried to gaslight me, the calmer I became. If he thought I was shrinking, he was wrong. I was sharpening. One evening, he strutted into the house later than usual, tossed his jacket down, and gave me a quick kiss that smelled nothing like him. I said nothing, but Emily caught my eye from across the kitchen table, and I could tell she smelled it too. She didn't ask questions, but the look said everything. My daughter wasn't stupid. She knew something was rotting in our house. It's strange, the things that stand out once you stop trying to excuse them. Greg started dressing better for work. Shirts pressed, ties straight, cologne I'd never seen before. He used to throw on whatever was clean, but now he looked like he was auditioning for GQ. He bought new shoes, the expensive kind, without even mentioning it to me. He also started carrying cash. That was a dead giveaway. Greg hated cash. He'd always said it was messy, and he preferred cards. But suddenly he had bills folded in his wallet, and they disappeared faster than I could blink. You don't need cash for late meetings. You need cash when you don't want a paper trail. I didn't confront him, not yet. Every red flag just added to the pile, and the pile was getting too high to ignore. My silence unnerved him. He started snapping over little things, the laundry not being folded, dinner not being ready at the exact minute he wanted. He was looking for a fight, anything to make me explode, so he could call me unstable, and flip the narrative. I didn't give him that satisfaction. One night, as he slipped his phone into his pocket and mumbled about needing to check on a shipment at work, I followed him out to the driveway. He looked startled, like a kid caught sneaking out past curfew. I just handed him his forgotten jacket and smiled. That smile rattled him more than any accusation could have. He knew I knew. He just didn't know how much. Inside, the kids pretended not to notice the tension, but Emily whispered to me later, "Mom, are you and Dad okay?" My chest tightened. I wanted to shield her, but there was no way to hide what was already in plain sight. By then, the red flags weren't just waving, they were practically smacking me in the face. And if Greg thought I was blind, he was about to learn just how clearly I could see. I knew the only way to stop Greg from twisting the story was to have proof he couldn't talk his way out of. Gaslighting only works if you don't have evidence, and I wasn't about to let him convince me I was crazy. So I started collecting the little things, bank statements, receipts, anything with a date and a dollar sign. Greg wasn't clever with money. He used the same joint credit card for everything, probably assuming I'd never look too closely. He'd always bragged about how organized I was with bills, but that became his downfall. I noticed restaurant charges in places I'd never been. Fancy steakhouses across town, wine bars in neighborhoods he didn't even like to drive through. And they weren't business lunches either. The charges hit at 9:45 p.m., 11:20 p.m. Work dinners don't end at midnight. Then there were the hotel charges. Dayton. Always Dayton. Small places, nothing high-end, but just far enough to be out of our normal routine. I remember staring at one receipt for a business suite on a Tuesday night and thinking, really? You couldn't even pick a city I wouldn't notice? I didn't confront him. Not yet. I kept printing everything out, sliding it into a folder I stashed under a pile of old blankets in the hall closet. Every charge was like a brick in a wall I was building, one that would box him in with no escape. The digital trail was even worse. Greg wasn't tech-savvy, and he clearly didn't think I'd ever check. One night, while he was in the shower, his email dinged on the laptop we still shared. He hadn't even bothered to log out. My hands shook when I clicked, but what I found made my stomach twist. Messages with Melissa Hart, his coworker. The tone was playful, intimate way beyond professional. Jokes about sneaking around the office, notes about meeting up when the coast was clear, and then the one that sealed it. Last night was worth the risk. I sat there staring at the screen, feeling the heat rise in my face. There it was, the confirmation. Not just dinners, not just late nights, but something physical. He wasn't hiding it from her. He was bragging. I forwarded the emails to myself, closed the laptop, and put it back exactly where I found it. When he came out of the shower, humming like life was perfect, I handed him his towel and smiled. He had no idea I was already holding the knife he'd sharpened himself. Over the next week, I became an investigator in my own home. I checked the mileage on his truck when he claimed he went straight to the office. It didn't add up. I noticed when he changed his passcode on his phone. I watched him delete texts with his back turned to me. Everything screamed guilty. The strangest part was how obvious it became once I stopped pretending. He'd be on his phone grinning like a teenager, and when I asked, "What's so funny?" he'd snap, "Work stuff." Sure, Greg. Because corporate logistics is just full of hilarious one-liners at 11 p.m. I also started writing things down. Dates, times, what he wore, what excuses he gave. It wasn't just about having a log, it was about keeping my sanity. Seeing it in writing kept me from second-guessing myself. When you live with a liar, you start doubting your own memory. That notebook was my anchor. Sam, my best friend, was the only one I told. We sat in her kitchen one afternoon, me flipping through the folder of receipts and screenshots like I was about to present at a board meeting. She leaned back, arms crossed, and said, "Amanda, this isn't suspicion anymore. This is a case. You could walk into a lawyer's office tomorrow and win." I wasn't ready yet. Something in me wanted to let him dig deeper, hang himself with his own rope. It wasn't enough for me to know he had to know that I knew, and that he couldn't wriggle out of it. One night, I left the folder out on the kitchen counter, just long enough for him to notice as he walked in. He froze, his eyes flicking toward it, then away, then back again. "What's that?" he asked, his voice tight. I slid it back into the drawer and said, "Just bills." He didn't press, but I could see the paranoia flicker across his face. Good. Let him sweat. Even the kids noticed the tension. Emily caught me printing something late at night and asked, "Is Dad in trouble?" I swallowed hard. He might be. She didn't ask more, but the way she hugged me before bed told me she already understood more than she should have at 16. By then, the gap between us had grown so wide it felt like we lived in different worlds. He was out chasing whatever attention he thought he deserved, and I was at home raising our kids and filing away the receipts. And the sad part? He didn't even realize how easy he was making it for me. He thought he was in control, but every late-night dinner, every sketchy hotel, every careless email was just another nail in the coffin of the marriage he'd already buried. And when the time came, I was going to open that coffin right in front of him. I finally decided to put Greg on the spot. Not because I thought he'd confess he wasn't the type, but I wanted to watch his face when I threw a few pieces of the puzzle at him and see how fast he scrambled to cover it. It was a Tuesday night. The kids were both upstairs doing homework, and Greg came home late again. He tossed his keys on the counter and went straight for the fridge, like a man who had nothing to hide. I leaned against the kitchen table, folder in hand, and said, "So, how was Dayton?" He froze for half a second, then laughed like I'd told a bad joke. "What are you talking about?" I slid a printed hotel receipt across the table. "This ring a bell?" Greg picked it up, scanned it, and let out a scoff. "Amanda, come on, that's a work trip. Why are you digging through receipts like some paranoid detective?" "Work trip?" I asked. "On a Tuesday night? At a hotel next to a highway exit?" His face hardened. "You're imagining things. You've been stressed lately. Maybe you should talk to someone." Classic gaslighting. Make me doubt myself, make me look like the unstable one. It was so textbook it was almost insulting. "I already do talk to someone," I snapped. "My lawyer." It wasn't true, not yet, but I wanted to see the color drain from his face. And it did. For a split second, he looked rattled. Then he laughed again, shaking his head. "You're overreacting. You've always been dramatic. I work hard, I provide for this family, and you think I'm sneaking off to hotels with someone? That's insane." "Oh." I wanted to slam the emails on the table, the ones where he told Melissa, "Last night was worth the risk." But I held back. I wasn't going to waste my best card on a man who thought denial was a strategy. "Greg," I said quietly, "I'm not stupid. And neither are the kids." That got his attention. He snapped his head up. "The kids? What did you tell them?" "Nothing. They can see it for themselves. Emily asks why you're never home. Nathan asks why you don't eat dinner with us anymore. You think you're fooling anyone?" His jaw tightened. "Don't drag them into this. Whatever issues you and I have, leave them out." I almost laughed. He'd already dragged them in when he walked through that door at 2 a.m. smelling like someone else's perfume. He was the one turning their family upside down. But before I could respond, footsteps came down the stairs. Emily, holding a notebook, hovered in the doorway. "Are you two fighting again?" she asked flatly. Greg straightened up, pasted on a smile. "No, honey, just talking." Emily wasn't buying it. She turned to me. "Is Dad cheating on you?" My heart clenched. She was 16, too smart for her own good, and I couldn't lie. Greg barked out a laugh. "Of course not. Where would you even get an idea like that?" Emily's eyes flicked between us. She didn't believe him for a second. "Because you're never home," she said bluntly. "Because Mom looks sad all the time. Because you smell like perfume that isn't hers." Greg's face went pale, then red. "Go upstairs," he ordered. Emily didn't move. She looked at me, waiting for an answer. I swallowed hard, the words caught in my throat. "Go on, sweetheart," I finally said. "We'll talk later." She shot her dad one more disgusted look and went back upstairs. The silence that followed was deafening. Greg leaned across the table, lowering his voice. "See what you're doing? You're poisoning them against me. And for No," I said. "You're doing that yourself." His hands curled into fists, resting on the table. He wasn't violent, but he wanted to intimidate me. It didn't work. I stared him down until he finally pulled back, muttering under his breath. "You need help, Amanda. You're paranoid. You're going to ruin this family with your obsession." That was rich, coming from the man who'd been blowing our mortgage payment on steak dinners and hotel rooms. I didn't answer. I just gathered the papers, slid them back into the folder, and walked upstairs. My silence was louder than any argument. Later that night, as I tucked Emily in, she whispered, "Mom, he's lying." I brushed her hair back from her face. "I know, sweetheart." She looked at me with those sharp, serious eyes. "So what are you going to do?" I kissed her forehead and said, "I'm going to handle it." And I meant it. Greg thought gaslighting would break me down, but all it did was make me stronger. Every denial, every lie, every deflection was fuel. He was building my case for me one smug sentence at a time. And when I was ready, he wouldn't even see it coming. The gaslighting didn't stop me, it pushed me harder. I already had receipts and emails, but I wanted the kind of proof that no lawyer, no judge, and no smug husband could explain away. I didn't want suspicion, I wanted certainty. So when Greg told me he had to go on another overnight trip, this time to Cincinnati, I didn't argue. I smiled, kissed him on the cheek, and wished him a safe drive. Then I called in a favor. My cousin worked part-time at a security company, and one of their clients happened to manage a small hotel just off the interstate. All I needed was confirmation. I gave him the date, the time, and Greg's truck description. A few days later, he texted me. "You were right. He wasn't alone." How? I opened the file he sent. Grainy footage, but clear enough. Greg walking into the hotel lobby with Melissa Hart, both of them laughing, her hand brushing against his arm like they were high school sweethearts sneaking into prom. My chest tightened as I watched, but there was also relief. Finally, the lies were over. He could spin receipts, deny emails, and call me paranoid. But he couldn't argue with his own face on camera. That night, I sat in the car outside the grocery store, staring at the video over and over. My hands shook, not because I doubted what I saw, but because it was real now. The marriage wasn't sick, it was dead. I didn't cry. The tears had dried up weeks ago. What I felt was anger, sharp and steady, cutting through every excuse he'd ever thrown at me. This wasn't about me being boring or dramatic. This was about him choosing someone else, choosing to lie, and then acting like I was crazy for noticing. I drove home, folder thicker than ever, and tucked the new evidence inside. When Greg walked through the door later, whistling like nothing was wrong, I had to stop myself from laughing. He thought he was clever, thought I was clueless. He had no idea his downfall was sitting on a USB drive in my purse. The next morning, over coffee, he rambled about his meetings and how exhausting they'd been. I nodded, sipping my drink, memorizing every word. Emily sat at the table scrolling through her phone, and Nathan shoveled cereal into his mouth. Greg acted like the perfect family man, and the kids played along, but the air felt heavy. Everyone knew. We just weren't saying it. Later that week, when he claimed he had another late-night project, I tested him. "Want me to drop off dinner at the office? You've been working so hard." He froze, then quickly recovered. No, don't bother. I'll just grab something on the way." I smiled. "All right, be safe." He left, and I followed. Not too close, I wasn't trying to get pulled over or tipped off, just close enough to see him take a turn that didn't lead to his office. My heart pounded as I trailed him across town, headlights blending in with the rest of traffic. He pulled into a parking lot, the Hilton Garden Inn. I parked 2 rows back, phone in hand, recording as Melissa's car rolled in beside him. She stepped out, hair done, heels clicking, grinning like she was walking into a date. He leaned in and kissed her right there in the open, bold as hell. No shame, no hesitation. I got it all on video. The kiss, the way he grabbed her hand, the way they walked inside like they owned the place. I didn't need anything else. That was the nail in the coffin. When I drove home, I felt strangely calm, like a doctor who'd finally confirmed the diagnosis after months of symptoms. There was no treatment plan, no recovery. The patient was gone. Greg came home the next morning, hair messy, shirt wrinkled, spinning some excuse about falling asleep at the office. I set his coffee down in front of him and smiled. He looked confused by my good mood. "Rough night?" I asked sweetly. He grunted, not meeting my eyes. He thought I was buying it, thought my silence meant ignorance. In reality, my silence was strategy. I spent that day scanning the footage and photos onto a secure drive, labeling every file, every date, every timestamp. The folder under the blankets was getting heavy. It wasn't just paper anymore, it was a case. And Greg had written every chapter himself. Emily noticed me working late that night. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "You've got something, don't you?" she asked. I looked at her and nodded. She didn't press for details, just walked over and hugged me. Good. He deserves whatever's coming. Hearing that from my 16-year-old daughter was both heartbreaking and empowering. She saw him for who he was, and she believed in me. That was all I needed. By the time I crawled into bed, Greg was already asleep, snoring like a man with nothing to worry about. I lay next to him, staring at the ceiling, replaying the video in my head. Every detail, every laugh, every touch between him and Melissa burned itself into my memory. The next time he stumbled through the door at 2 a.m., thinking he was in control, he'd learned just how wrong he was. When I finally chose the night to confront him, I didn't do it in the heat of an argument. I waited. I wanted him tired, sloppy, and arrogant, the way he always was when he walked in at 2 in the morning thinking he'd pulled one over on me. That Friday, I tucked the kids in early. Emily pretended to read, but I knew she was awake, listening for the sound of the garage door. Nathan was already out, headphones on, dreaming of video games. The house was quiet, and I sat in the living room with the lights low, the folder of evidence spread across the coffee table like I was setting a trap. At 2:07 a.m., the garage opened. The sound of his boots dragging on the tile made my stomach turn. He came in, reeking of alcohol and perfume, humming like life couldn't get any better. He froze when he saw me sitting there, arms crossed. "You're still up?" he asked, trying to sound casual. I gestured toward the photos, the receipts, the video stills. "Care to explain?" His smile faltered, but only for a second. "Amanda, seriously? You're still on this? That's nothing. You're overthinking." "Cut the crap, Greg." I picked up a printout of him kissing Melissa in the hotel parking lot. "This is nothing? Because it looks like something to me." "Artem." He opened his mouth, closed it, then went for the classic play. Anger. "So you've been spying on me now, following me around? Do you hear yourself? This is insane." I didn't flinch. "What's insane is you thinking I'd stay blind forever. What's insane is you walking into this house at 2 in the morning, smelling like someone else, and acting like I should just shut up and play house." For once, he didn't have a snappy comeback. His jaw clenched, his hands balled into fists at his sides, but the words wouldn't come. I stood up and pointed toward the front door. Next to it sat a duffel bag I'd packed earlier, with his essential shirts, pants, shaving kit, and nothing else. "Your bags are packed. You're done here." The color drained from his face. "What?" "You heard me. Get out." He took a step forward, trying to soften his voice. "Amanda, listen. I messed up, okay? But we can fix this. Don't throw away 15 years over a mistake. A mistake is forgetting to take out the trash. A mistake is leaving the gas tank empty. Sleeping with another woman for months isn't a mistake, Greg. It's a choice. And you made it." His eyes darted toward the staircase, like he was hoping the kids hadn't heard. Emily's door creaked upstairs, but she stayed put. She didn't need to come down. She knew exactly what was happening. Greg dropped the charm act and went cold. "You're really doing this? You're going to break up our family because you can't get over yourself?" That almost made me laugh. "You broke up this family the night you decided we weren't enough. I'm just making it official." He tried one last time, leaning on the same tired excuses. "She doesn't mean anything. It was just attention. I was lonely. You don't get how hard it is." "Lonely?" I snapped. "You've got 2 kids upstairs who idolize you. You had a wife sitting right here, waiting for you, holding this family together, and you were lonely?" Silence. He couldn't answer, because there was no answer. He stared at the duffel bag, then back at me. "Where am I supposed to go?" "Not my problem." His face twisted with anger. "You'll regret this." I shook my head. "The only thing I regret is giving you this long to show me who you really are." For a moment, I thought he might refuse to leave. But then he grabbed the duffel bag, slung it over his shoulder, and walked out the door. The slam echoed through the house, rattling the picture frames on the wall. I stood there, shaking but steady, staring at the closed door. My marriage wasn't broken anymore, it was over. When I finally went upstairs, Emily was sitting on her bed, wide-eyed. "Did you tell him to leave?" "Yes," I said simply. Her shoulders relaxed, and for the first time in months, I saw a hint of relief on her face. "Good." Nathan stirred in his room, but he didn't come out. "Tomorrow, I'd explain it to him as gently as I could. Tonight, all that mattered was that the weight had shifted. The lies, the gaslighting, the sneaking around, they weren't in my house anymore. I crawled into bed alone, the silence louder than any of Greg's excuses. It wasn't peace yet, but it was the first step toward it. And deep down, I knew he hadn't just lost his marriage, he'd lost his audience. From now on, every lie he told would be echoing into empty rooms. The first morning without Greg in the house felt strangely calm. No stomping boots, no fake cheerful good morning champ to Nathan, no forced smile for Emily. Just quiet. For me, that quiet was a relief. For the kids, it was confusion. Nathan was the first to ask. He came down to the kitchen in his pajamas, rubbing his eyes, and saw only me at the table. "Where's Dad?" His voice cracked a little, and I could tell he already knew but didn't want it to be true. I set down my coffee mug. "He won't be living here anymore." Nathan froze, then shoved his hands into his pockets. "Because of the fighting?" I nodded. "Because of the choices he made." He didn't say anything else. He just sat down and ate his cereal in silence, eyes locked on the table. Emily, on the other hand, wasn't confused, she was furious. She came downstairs later, hair tied back, eyes blazing. "So he's gone?" "Yes," I said. "Good. He doesn't deserve to be here." Her anger cut deep because she had every right to feel it. She'd seen more than a 16-year-old should have to see. She wasn't mourning the loss of her dad, she was mourning the man she thought he was. The days that followed were a mix of relief and raw nerves. Greg tried calling the kids, but Emily ignored every attempt. Nathan picked up once, lasted maybe 2 minutes before handing me the phone and whispering, "I don't want to talk to him." Greg yelled in my ear that I was poisoning them against him, that I was turning them into strangers. But he didn't understand that they'd made up their own minds. He'd done the damage, not me. School became harder. Nathan's grades slipped, and his teacher called me in for a conference. She said he'd been quiet, withdrawn, not himself. Emily, on the other hand, became sharp-tongued, snapping at friends and teachers. One night, she slammed her door so hard the picture frames rattled. When I knocked and asked if she was okay, she shouted, "He ruined everything. Why did you even marry him?" I sat on the floor outside her door, tears streaming down my face, and said the only thing I could, because I didn't know he'd turn into this. At dinner, the three of us ate in silence more often than not. Sometimes Emily would break it with a jab. "He's probably with her right now." Nathan would mutter, "Don't talk about it," and then retreat back into his plate. They were processing in completely different ways, one with fire, the other with ice, and I was stuck trying to hold both of them together when I barely felt steady myself. One weekend, Greg showed up unannounced. He knocked on the door like he still lived there, and when I opened it, he barged past me, calling for the kids. Emily came halfway down the stairs, crossed her arms, and said, "You don't live here anymore." Greg tried to soften his tone. "Sweetheart, come on. I just want to talk." She glared at him. "Stop calling me that. You don't get to anymore." Then she stormed back upstairs. Nathan peeked out from his room, saw Greg, and slammed his door shut. That broke Greg's act. He spun on me, furious. "You've poisoned them. You turned my own kids against me." I pointed to the door. "Get out, Greg." "Have her. He left, slamming it hard enough to rattle the windows, and I realized in that moment just how much he'd underestimated his own children. He thought they were blind, but they'd seen more clearly than either of us. The fallout seeped into everything. Emily started hanging around a new group of friends, girls, who hated their parents, and spent weekends sneaking around. Nathan retreated into video games, sometimes playing until dawn. I'd find him asleep at his desk, headset still on. I knew they were hurting, but no lecture or punishment was going to fix it. So I called Dr. Richard Coleman, a family therapist recommended by a friend. It took weeks to convince the kids to go, but eventually, they did. The first session was brutal. Emily sat with her arms crossed, glaring at the floor, and Nathan didn't say a word the entire hour. But when we left, I noticed Emily walking just a little closer to me, and Nathan held my hand for the first time in months. Dr. Coleman told me later, kids don't just grieve the marriage, they grieve the person they thought their father was. That grief comes out as anger, silence, rebellion, it's all the same wound. He was right. Watching them wrestle with betrayal was harder than facing it myself. I could handle Greg breaking my trust, but watching him shatter theirs? That was unforgivable. And the saddest part? He never even tried to understand. He thought a few phone calls and forced visits would patch it up. He didn't realize that every unanswered text, every slammed door, was their way of saying what I'd already told him. He was out, and nothing he said could fix it. The cheating hadn't just ended our marriage, it had carved a fault line straight through our family, and as much as I hated him for what he'd done to me, I hated him more for what he'd done to them. Filing for divorce wasn't something I did lightly. I didn't want to just kick Greg out and hope he stayed gone. I wanted the papers, the signatures, the stamp from the court. I wanted this thing nailed down so he couldn't slither back in whenever he felt like playing house again. I made an appointment with Ellen Grayson, a divorce attorney recommended by Sam. Walking into her office felt like stepping into another world's stacks of case files, walls lined with degrees, and a woman who looked like she'd eaten lying husbands for breakfast. She shook my hand, smiled, and said, "Tell me everything." Oh. So I did. The late nights, the perfume, the receipts, the emails, the hotel footage. By the time I finished, Ellen leaned back in her chair and said, "Amanda, this isn't just divorce. This is strategy. You've got him dead to rights." Her advice was simple. Don't let emotions drive the case. Document everything. Keep the kids' needs front and center. And don't take the bait when Greg tries to turn this into a circus. She explained how custody battles often got ugly, especially when the cheating parent tried to flip the narrative. He'll claim you're bitter, unstable, trying to alienate the kids. Expect it. Don't react to it. I left her office feeling both terrified and empowered. Terrified because this was real now: court dates, affidavits, depositions. Empowered because I had someone in my corner who wasn't afraid of Greg's bluster. When Greg got served, the explosion came fast. He stormed into the house, waving the papers like they were a personal insult. Divorce? Really, Amanda? After everything I've provided for this family, this is how you repay me? I stayed calm. This isn't repayment, Greg. This is accountability. He laughed bitterly. You think a judge is going to give you everything? You're crazy. The kids need their father. The kids need stability, I said. And stability doesn't look like you sneaking into hotels with Melissa Hart. That shut him up for about 10 seconds. Then came the threats. I'll fight you on custody. I'll make sure you don't get a dime. You'll regret this. I smiled. Good luck explaining those receipts to a judge. The custody fight started almost immediately. Greg tried calling Emily and Nathan non-stop, leaving voicemails about how much he loved them and how their crazy mother was keeping him away. Emily blocked his number. Nathan listened once, then deleted the messages. Greg showed up at Dr. Coleman's office, demanding to sit in on therapy sessions. The receptionist turned him away. In his desperation, Greg even tried spinning a sob story to his family. He called his sister, painting me as some unstable woman who'd lost her mind. She called me a week later, and I calmly emailed her a packet of the evidence receipts, photos, and screenshots. She didn't call back again. Meanwhile, Ellen kept me focused. She filed motions, gathered affidavits, and prepared me for Greg's tactics. He's going to play victim, she said. He'll claim he was neglected, lonely, pushed away. None of that matters. What matters is what you can prove. And you, Amanda, can prove everything. The first hearing was brutal. Greg strutted into the courtroom in a brand new suit, Melissa sitting in the back row like some twisted cheerleader. He told the judge I was paranoid, that I'd turned the kids against him, that I was vengeful. Ellen slid the hotel footage across the table without saying a word. The judge took one look at the timestamp and raised an eyebrow. Greg's smile faded. After that, the tone shifted. He still fought, still tried to spin, but the wind was out of his sails. Every time he opened his mouth, Ellen was ready with a document that proved otherwise. Watching him squirm under cross-examination was almost satisfying. Almost. But the real satisfaction came from my kids. Emily testified calm, steady, unflinching that she didn't feel safe around her dad anymore. Nathan didn't testify, but his therapist submitted a statement about how Greg's behavior had damaged his trust. The judge listened. At the end of the hearing, temporary custody was awarded to me. Greg got supervised visitation every other weekend. When he heard the words, his face turned red, and he muttered something about bias against fathers. The judge didn't even look up. Walking out of that courthouse, papers in hand, I felt like I'd finally pulled the rug out from under him. For years, Greg had controlled the narrative, twisting every fight into my fault. Now, in front of a judge, with evidence stacked against him, he couldn't twist anything. The truth was there in black and white, and for once, he had no power to rewrite it. At home, Emily hugged me tight. "You did it, Mom." I shook my head. "We did it. He doesn't get to break us anymore." "How?" And for the first time in months, I actually believed it. Greg thought the courtroom was the end of it, but I knew better. Divorce papers and custody orders were just one part of the story. What really burned him wasn't losing me, it was losing control of how people saw him. And once the truth started trickling out into our community, he realized just how much he had to lose. The first spark came from school. Emily, never one to hold back, told her best friend exactly why her dad didn't live with us anymore. That friend told her mom, and within a week, half the PTA had the story. By the time I showed up for a bake sale, people weren't whispering behind my back anymore. They were whispering about Greg. One mom leaned in close and said, "We always wondered about him. He was a little too friendly at those fundraisers." Another gave me a pat on the arm and said, "Good for you for kicking him out. A lot of women don't have the courage." I didn't spread the gossip myself. I didn't have to. The receipts and the photos did the talking. And the thing about small communities is, once the story has legs, you couldn't stop it if you tried. Melissa didn't escape either. She worked at the same logistics company as Greg, and apparently word got around fast. I heard from Sam that her coworkers stopped inviting her out to lunch, stopped chatting with her in the break room. One of them, even accidentally, let slip to her boss why she was suddenly persona non grata. The boss wasn't thrilled about employees sneaking off to hotel rooms on company time. Within a month, Melissa was reassigned to a less prominent role. Greg, meanwhile, lost out on a promotion he'd been bragging about for months. I didn't lift a finger. The universe was doing the work for me. But I'll admit I nudged it along. When people asked how I was doing, I didn't lie. I told them the truth, that my husband had been cheating, that I'd filed for divorce, that I was moving on with my kids. I wasn't dramatic. I didn't embellish. I just stated the facts with a calm smile. That calmness made it sting more for him, because it showed I wasn't destroyed. I was standing tall, and he was the one shrinking. At church, things got especially awkward. Greg tried showing up one Sunday, striding in like he still belonged. But by then, too many people knew. Our pastor gave him a polite handshake, but the conversation was short. The rest of the congregation avoided him like he carried something contagious. Meanwhile, I sat in my usual pew with Emily and Nathan, and people went out of their way to greet us warmly. The message was clear. We belonged. He didn't. Greg called me later that week, voice dripping with bitterness. "You've turned everyone against me." I laughed. "I didn't turn anyone. You did that yourself." I'm note. That silence on the other end told me I'd hit a nerve. What he hated most was that he couldn't spin the story anymore. He'd always been the charming one at parties, the guy who cracked jokes at barbecues, the neighbor who waved while mowing the lawn. Now, that charm fell flat because people saw what was underneath it. They saw the man who'd betrayed his family. It wasn't just the adults, either. Kids talk. Emily's friends knew, Nathan's teammates whispered. One day, Nathan came home and said, "Dad's the butt of jokes in the locker room. They call him Motel Mitchell." He looked embarrassed, but also strangely satisfied. Even the teenagers had taken sides. I didn't gloat, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel like justice. For months, Greg had made me feel small, like I was overreacting, like I was losing my grip. Now, it was his turn to feel the walls closing in. And the best part? I didn't have to raise my voice or throw a fit. The truth did all the heavy lifting. Melissa eventually stopped showing up at the same places we did. No more running into her at the grocery store, no more awkward sightings around town. Rumor had it her marriage prospects weren't looking so great either. Men weren't lining up to date the woman known for blowing up another family. Actions have consequences, and hers were catching up fast. I focused on keeping things steady for Emily and Nathan, but even they noticed the shift. Emily smirked one afternoon and said, "He's finally paying for it, isn't he?" Nathan chimed in, "Good. He deserves it." And that's when I realized something. Revenge isn't always about grand gestures or dramatic scenes. Sometimes it's as simple as standing back and letting someone's actions expose them. Greg had written his own downfall, and all I had to do was stop covering for him. The gossip, the whispers, the lost promotions, those weren't my doing. But watching him squirm as the perfect image he'd built crumbled, that was a kind of satisfaction I hadn't expected. Revenge wasn't about hurting him. It was about reclaiming my peace, my voice, and my place in the community without carrying his lies anymore. And that revenge, the quiet kind, was the sweetest of all. Once the dust started to settle, the adrenaline that had been carrying me for weeks wore off. I'd spent so much time gathering evidence, staying calm, plotting my next move, that I hadn't let myself feel just how exhausted I was. The day after the custody hearing, I woke up, made breakfast for the kids, and then sat at the kitchen table staring at the wall, realizing I had no idea what normal even looked like anymore. That's when Dr. Coleman became more than just a name on a referral list. Emily had been opening up bit by bit in her sessions, and Nathan was finally starting to talk instead of shutting down. But Ellen, my lawyer, had said something that stuck with me. "You need to take care of yourself too. Otherwise, this fight will chew you up." So, I booked my own appointment. Sitting on that leather chair across from Dr. Coleman, I felt exposed in a way I hadn't felt even in court. He asked me simple questions. How are you sleeping? How are you eating? When's the last time you did something just for yourself? I laughed because the answers were all the same. I'm not. For the first time, I admitted out loud that I wasn't okay, that Greg's betrayal had left me not just angry but hollow, that I'd spent so much energy protecting the kids and building a case that I'd stopped being a person outside of survival mode. "Doctor?" Coleman nodded like he'd heard it 1,000 times before. "That's normal," he said. "But normal doesn't mean you have to stay there." He gave me homework. Not legal documents, not strategy notes, real homework. Take 30 minutes a day for myself. Go for a walk without my phone. Read a book that had nothing to do with divorce. Write down 3 things every night that I still had control over. It sounded ridiculous at first, but it worked. That first week, I wrote things like, I control what we eat for dinner. I control how I respond to Greg's calls. I control whether I cry in front of the kids. They were small victories, but they were mine. Meanwhile, therapy with the kids slowly started to stitch us together. Emily's fire cooled into something more focused. She started talking about college again instead of revenge. Nathan began leaving his headset behind and joining me for walks. Even if we barely talked, just being outside together was progress. One session, Dr. Coleman asked Emily, "What's one thing you want from your mom right now?" She thought for a second and said, "I just want her to be happy again." That hit me like a punch. She wasn't asking for money or revenge, or even for me to fix what Greg broke. She just wanted her mom back. That night, I sat on the porch and realized I couldn't rebuild anything for them until I started rebuilding for myself. So I made changes. Small ones at first. I joined a yoga class at the community center. I started cooking meals I actually liked instead of just what Greg used to want. I even let Sam drag me out for coffee without feeling guilty about leaving the kids for an hour. Every little step felt like reclaiming a piece of myself Greg had chipped away over the years. He'd spent so long making me feel boring, unworthy, invisible. But the truth was, I wasn't any of those things. I was tired, yes. Wounded, definitely. But I wasn't broken. Of course, Greg hated it. He'd call or text, trying to start fights. "You're brainwashing the kids. You're parading around like you're some hero. You think people respect you? They're laughing at you." I stopped responding. Silence was its own kind of revenge. One Saturday, Emily walked into the kitchen and caught me laughing at something on TV. She froze, like she hadn't heard that sound in months. "You're smiling," she said, half surprised, half relieved. "Yeah," I said. "I guess I am." Nathan glanced up from his cereal. "Feels weird, but good." It wasn't perfect. Nights were still hard, especially when the house was too quiet. But little by little, the weight lifted. Therapy gave me tools. My kids gave me purpose. And Greg's absence gave me space. That combination built a strength I didn't even know I had. Not the loud kind. Not the type that comes from shouting in someone's face. The quiet kind. The kind that sits across from a liar and doesn't flinch. The kind that wakes up every morning, packs lunches, pays bills, and keeps moving forward no matter how many doors have been slammed. And the more I leaned into that strength, the clearer it became. Greg hadn't destroyed me. He'd revealed me. He'd shown me exactly what I could survive and what I would never tolerate again. Walking into the courthouse for the final hearing felt different from the first time. Back then, I was nervous, shaky, still wondering if Greg could somehow twist things to make me look like the villain. This time, I felt steady. I had Dr. Dallery, Coleman's words in my head, Ellen at my side, and 2 kids who had already shown more maturity than their father ever could. Greg showed up in another brand new suit, acting like this was a business negotiation instead of the end of a marriage. Melissa didn't come this time, which almost made me laugh. She'd been his cheerleader at the early hearings, but when things started looking bad, she vanished. Typical. The judge didn't waste time. He laid out the facts, the financial records, the hotel footage, the testimony from the kid's therapist. Every piece of evidence told the same story. Greg hadn't just been unfaithful, he'd destabilized his own family and tried to cover it up with lies. When the judge read the verdict, it was like someone had cracked open a window in a suffocating room. Sole custody awarded to me. Greg would get supervised visitation twice a month. He'd be responsible for child support, and half of the joint assets were mine to manage. The house? Mine. The car payments? Split, but I kept the one that actually worked. Greg's face was priceless. For months, he told anyone who would listen that he'd never let a judge take his kids away. Now he sat there, jaw tight, hands gripping the table like he could squeeze a different outcome out of the wood. Ellen didn't gloat, she didn't need to. She just closed her file, gave me a nod and whispered, "You did it." After the gavel came down, Greg spun toward me. "You think you've won? This isn't over." I stood, gathering my papers. "It's over when I say it's over, Greg, and I say it's over now." He stormed out, slamming the courtroom door so hard the bailiff raised an eyebrow. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Walking down those courthouse steps, Emily grabbed my hand. She was beaming, relief written all over her face. "Finally," she said. Nathan didn't say much, but the way he leaned into me told me everything I needed to know. They felt safe again. That night, we celebrated in the simplest way possible. Pizza, sodas, and a movie on the couch. No tension, no arguments, no waiting for a door to creak open at 2 a.m. Just us, laughing at a cheesy comedy, knowing that the paper sitting on the counter meant we were free. The next few weeks were a strange adjustment. Greg tried to push boundaries, of course texting me at all hours, showing up early for his supervised visits, complaining about the cost of child support. But the difference now was that I had legal backing. Every time he crossed a line, I documented it. Every time he raised his voice, I walked away. The court order wasn't just paperwork, it was a shield. Friends and neighbors started reaching out more too. Some offered sympathy, others shared their own stories of betrayal. I was shocked by how many women quietly admitted they'd gone through the same thing, hiding it under smiles at barbecues and soccer games. One neighbor hugged me and said, "You didn't just stand up for yourself, you stood up for all of us." And she was right. The verdict wasn't just about punishing Greg. It was about proving that I wasn't weak, that I wasn't crazy, that I hadn't imagined the late nights or the perfume or the lies. A judge had looked at the evidence and said, "Yes, you're telling the truth." That validation carried more weight than I expected. For Emily and Nathan, the verdict gave them stability. Emily started talking about college again, making plans that didn't involve escape but opportunity. Nathan signed up for soccer tryouts, finally pulling himself out of the haze of video games. It wasn't perfect, we still had hard days, but the heaviness had lifted. One evening, as I was tucking Nathan in, he whispered, "Does this mean he can't yell at us anymore?" I hugged him tight. "That's exactly what it means." Greg still had visitation, but he couldn't bully his way back into our lives the way he once had. The law was on my side now. And even though revenge wasn't the goal, I won't lie, it felt damn good to watch the man who had treated me like I was nothing walk out of that courtroom with nothing to show for his arrogance. The divorce verdict didn't just change our legal status, it changed the atmosphere in our home, the way the kids looked at me, the way I looked at myself. For the first time in years, I felt in control not of Greg, not of the community gossip, but of my own life. That night, after the kids went to bed, I poured myself a glass of wine, sat on the porch, and listened to the crickets. No waiting for the sound of his truck in the driveway. No dread about what excuse he'd bring through the door. Just peace. And for the first time, peace didn't feel temporary. It felt permanent. The morning after the verdict, I woke up without the usual knot in my stomach. No court date circled on the calendar. No stack of paperwork staring at me from the kitchen counter. For the first time in months, I wasn't preparing for battle. I was just awake. Alive. Free. The house felt different too. The same walls, the same creaky floors, but lighter somehow. It wasn't haunted by Greg's voice or his late-night excuses anymore. It was mine, legally and emotionally. I decided to start small. The first thing I did was buy a brand new set of bedsheets, bright teal, something Greg would have called too loud. I didn't care. I wanted color back in my life. The second thing was clearing out his junk from the garage. Old tools, boxes of cables he never used, a half-finished project car that had been rotting in the corner for years. I hired a junk removal service and watched them haul it away, every piece of clutter feeling like another weight off my chest. Emily and Nathan noticed the shift too. Emily started hanging out in the living room more instead of locking herself in her room. Nathan asked if we could repaint his bedroom. We made a weekend project of it, him picking a bold navy blue, me showing him how to tape edges. He got more paint on himself than the walls, but the smile on his face was worth it. I also threw myself into work again. My supervisor at the hospital had been patient while I was in survival mode, but now I was ready to prove myself again. I stayed late a few nights, covered shifts without complaining, and even took on a leadership role for a new department project. It felt good to have my professional identity back, something that was mine alone, untouched by Greg's shadow. Therapy with Dr. Coleman didn't stop just because the divorce was finalized. If anything, it became more valuable. Instead of spending sessions strategizing about court, we focused on me, what I wanted for my life, how I wanted to rebuild. He asked me once, "When was the last time you did something just for Amanda?" I had to sit there and think. It had been years. So I started trying. I signed up for a yoga class at the community center. The first time, I was the stiffest person in the room, but by the end, I could actually breathe without my chest tightening. I also joined a Saturday morning walking group. Most of the women were around my age, a mix of single moms, retirees, and a couple of newlyweds who clearly had no idea how real life would hit them in a few years. It didn't matter. I laughed, I shared, I listened. I was part of something again. The revenge part of me, the one that remembered Greg, sneering at me for being boring, took pleasure in every little step I made. Every yoga pose I mastered, every mile I walked, every dinner Emily and Nathan and I shared without tension was another reminder. He didn't break me. He freed me. I even started cooking again. Not the rushed microwave something while he complains kind of cooking, but real meals. I tried new recipes, let the kids join in, and turned dinner into something fun. Emily made pasta from scratch one night. Nathan experimented with barbecue sauce, and I rediscovered what it felt like to laugh in the kitchen without waiting for the door to slam. Financially, things were tight but manageable. Greg's child support checks came in on time, though usually with a bitter note attached. I ignored them. I had the house, a steady job, and enough determination to stretch every dollar. I started setting aside a little savings for Emily's college and Nathan's activities. For once, planning for the future didn't feel like a trap. It felt like hope. One evening, as we sat eating dinner, Emily said, "You're different, Mom." I froze. "Different how?" "You smile more. You don't look tired all the time. It's like you're lighter." Nathan nodded, his mouth full of mashed potatoes. "Yeah, it's not scary anymore." That hit me harder than any court ruling. My kids noticed. They felt the change. That was bigger than any revenge. I also found new confidence in saying no. No to extra obligations I didn't want. No to gossipers who tried to pry into my divorce. No to Greg when he tried to guilt-trip me during pickups. Every no was its own kind of power. And then came the biggest step. I started thinking about what happiness might look like for me as a woman, not just as a mom. I wasn't jumping into dating. God, no. But I let myself imagine it. The possibility of companionship without betrayal, of laughter without suspicion. It wasn't about needing someone. It was about proving to myself that I could want something more, someday, on my own terms. By late summer, the house had new paint, the garden was blooming again, and the three of us had a rhythm that worked. Emily was filling out college applications with excitement instead of dread. Nathan was thriving in soccer, running harder than I'd ever seen him. And me? I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't flashy, but it was ours. And that, more than anything, was enough. The first hint that life could move forward came in the most ordinary way. It was a Tuesday evening at Nathan's soccer practice, and I was standing on the sidelines with a cup of coffee, trying to stay warm in the fall chill. A man about my age stood a few feet away, cheering just as loudly for his daughter. After a while, we ended up laughing at the same fumbled play, and that was it, our first real conversation. His name was Mark, a widower raising his daughter alone. There was no forced charm, no flashy lines, just a dad with kind eyes, trying to juggle work, parenting, and showing up. I wasn't looking for anything. Honestly, the thought of dating again terrified me. But Mark didn't feel like dating. He felt like friendship first. We started talking at practices, then over coffee, then eventually meeting for lunch. It wasn't a whirlwind romance, it was a slow, steady reintroduction to the idea that someone could actually treat me with respect. Emily noticed before I said anything. One Saturday morning, she smirked at me across the breakfast table. "So, Mom, who's the guy?" I nearly choked on my coffee. "What guy?" "The one who makes you smile at your phone like a teenager. Don't even try to deny it." Nathan looked up from his cereal. "Wait, Mom has a boyfriend?" "He's not my boyfriend," I said quickly. "We're just talking." Emily rolled her eyes. "Right. Talking." The kids weren't upset, though. If anything, they were relieved to see me opening up again, and I made sure to move slowly, not just for myself, but for them. I had no intention of letting another man disrupt our lives. Meanwhile, I kept building on the life I'd started after the divorce. At work, I was promoted to assistant nursing manager, a role that gave me more say in scheduling and policies. It wasn't just a pay bump, it was proof that I could climb without Greg's shadow dragging me down. Outside of work, I pushed myself physically and mentally. The yoga classes became a habit, and I joined a 5 Kelvin's charity run with the walking group. Crossing that finish line wasn't about time, it was about knowing I could set a goal and hit it, even after everything. Mark fit into that new life naturally. He wasn't overbearing or demanding. He understood the chaos of kids, late work nights, and the baggage that comes with loss. His wife had died suddenly a few years back, and when he talked about her, there was no bitterness, just love and grief that had softened into memory. It made me realize how different that was from Greg's brand of chaos. Greg had left wreckage everywhere he went. Mark carried his past with dignity. We didn't rush into anything official, but over time, it felt right to include him in more parts of our lives. He came to one of Nathan's games and cheered louder than anyone. Emily asked him a dozen questions about his job in IT, and he answered each one like she was the most important person in the room. It wasn't dramatic or cinematic. It was simple, steady, and kind. Exactly what we needed. Greg, of course, couldn't stand it. When he picked up the kids one weekend, he sneered, "So you've already replaced me, huh?" "Figures." I looked him dead in the eye and said, I didn't replace you, Greg. You lost the spot. He had no comeback for that. The best part was, Greg's opinion didn't matter anymore. He had no power over me, no say in my happiness. For years, I'd lived in fear of his reactions. Would he get angry? Would he sulk? Would he punish me with silence? Now, it was just noise. Emily thrived with the stability. She got her acceptance letter to a state university, and I cried reading it. Not out of sadness, but out of pride. After everything, she was still moving forward, still chasing her dreams. Nathan was blossoming too. His coach said he was one of the most determined players on the team, not the most talented, but the one who never gave up. That was enough for me. As for me, I realized I'd reached a point I didn't think was possible during those sleepless nights after Greg's betrayal. I wasn't defined by what had happened to me anymore. I was defined by how I'd responded, how I'd rebuilt, how I'd chosen to live. The funny thing is, I didn't set out for revenge. Not really. I set out to survive, to protect my kids, to find some piece of myself again. But revenge has a way of sneaking in when you live well. Every smile with my kids, every laugh with Mark, every step forward was its own kind of justice. Greg could stew in bitterness all he wanted. We were too busy living. One evening, after a long day, I sat on the porch again, with that same teal blanket I'd bought months before. Mark was beside me, the kids inside bickering over what movie to watch. The house glowed warm behind us. "You ever think you'd get here?" he asked. I shook my head. "Not in a million years." "But you did." And he was right. I had. That realization, quiet, steady, undeniable, wasn't flashy revenge. But it was the sweetest victory I could have asked for. Graduation day for Emily hit me harder than I expected. Standing in the crowded gym, surrounded by proud parents and clicking cameras, I saw my daughter walk across that stage with her cap tilted just slightly sideways and the biggest grin on her face. The announcer called her name, and I swear my chest nearly burst. She had done it through the chaos, the arguments, the broken family dinners. She had held steady and carved her own path. Nathan clapped so hard his hands turned red. Mark squeezed my shoulder, his quiet way of saying, "You did this." And maybe for the first time I believed it. Emily wasn't just graduating from high school, she was proof that our family had survived and grown stronger without Greg's shadow looming over us. Greg showed up, of course. Sat 3 rows back, arms crossed, that same bitter expression plastered on his face. He didn't come over afterward, didn't say a word to Emily beyond a half-hearted congratulations. It should have stung, but instead, it reminded me why I'd fought so hard to break free. His absence in spirit, even when he was physically there, said more than any insult he'd ever thrown at me. That evening, our little house filled with laughter, friends, neighbors, and the smell of barbecue. Emily's friends piled in, Nathan ran around playing host, and Mark manned the grill like he'd been part of the family forever. I stood there watching it all, realizing this was the life Greg said I'd never be able to handle on my own. Well, here it was. Full, happy, alive. Living well had become my quiet revenge. Not the kind that makes headlines, but the kind you feel in your bones every morning when you wake up and know you're free. Free from walking on eggshells, free from the lies, free from wondering whose perfume clung to your husband's shirt. Nathan thrived too. He grew taller, his confidence sharper, his smile brighter. He wasn't that anxious kid waiting for the next explosion. He was a teenager with a future, already talking about playing soccer in college one day. Emily was packing for university, filling boxes with books and posters and the kind of cheap string lights every dorm room needs. Watching them prepare for their futures felt like the universe's way of saying, "See, you made the right choice." As for me, my relationship with Mark deepened slowly, naturally. He didn't try to replace Greg or force himself into a role that wasn't his. He was just steady, reliable. The kind of man who picked up milk on his way home without being asked. The kind who remembered Nathan's game schedule without reminders. The kind who made me laugh without making me question my worth. One night, after Emily had gone to bed and Nathan was at a sleepover, Mark and I sat in the backyard under the string lights I'd hung up. He raised a glass and said, "To second chances, not the flashy kind, but the real kind." I clinked his glass. "To second chances, It wasn't about rewriting the past. It was about building something better in the present. Neighbors sometimes asked me if I'd ever gotten revenge on Greg. I always smiled and told them the truth. I didn't have to. Life handled that for me. His reputation was shot, his relationship with Melissa didn't last, and his bitterness was obvious to anyone who spent 5 minutes with him. Meanwhile, I had rebuilt a life that was full of love, laughter, and stability. Revenge didn't come in a dramatic explosion. It came in the quiet, steady wins that piled up day after day. Emily once asked me if I regretted any of it, the marriage, the years with Greg, the messy divorce. I thought about it long and hard before answering. I don't regret it, because it gave me you and Nathan. And without the pain, I don't think I'd appreciate what I have now. She nodded, wise beyond her years. So basically, Dad was just the practice run. I laughed harder than I had in months. Leave it to my daughter to boil down years of heartache into one line. The truth is, Greg's betrayal didn't define me. What defined me was how I responded, choosing to walk away, choosing to rebuild, choosing to love my kids harder, and eventually letting myself love again. That's why, when I look back, the story isn't really about Greg at all. It's about Emily walking across that stage, about Nathan scoring his first goal and looking for me in the stands, about the teal bedsheets, the fresh paint, the yoga classes, and the Saturday walks. It's about rediscovering the woman who existed long before the lies and remembering she deserved more. And every time I sit on my porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon with peace in my heart, I know one thing with absolute certainty. Living well is the sweetest revenge. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, but it's real, and it's mine. If you connected with this journey, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Here we dive into powerful family revenge stories, real revenge stories, and the kind of family drama that reminds us we're never alone. Leave a comment, share your thoughts, and join the conversation. I'd love to hear your story too.